Welcome, lovers of the dark. Tonight's tale, The Renovation, follows the last desperate tenants of a decaying apartment building. When a ruthless developer buys their home, their fight to stay becomes a terrifying game of survival. What begins with harassment soon descends into a surreal nightmare as hallways shift, doors disappear, and they realize their building is being transformed into a human maze. Settle in and listen to what happens when gentrification takes a truly sadistic turn.
The Corinthian was dying. It exhaled a scent of damp plaster and decay, a terminal sigh that had been rattling through its 7 floors for decades. Once a bastion of minor elegance, its marble lobby was now a mosaic of grime and cracked tile, the brass letterboxes tarnished to a murky brown. Yet, for a handful of souls, it was home. Alfred Adler, in apartment 7A, was as much a fixture as the corroded plumbing. He had lived there for 42 years, the last 12 alone after Clara passed. The apartment was a museum of their life together. The faint indentation on her side of the floral sofa, the spice rack she'd insisted on that he never used, the window box that still bloomed with stubborn geraniums every summer. The Corinthian held the last tangible echoes of his wife, and he would not be parted from them. 4 floors below, in 3B, Beatrice Moreau was sketching the way the afternoon light fractured through the grimy panes of her bay window. An art student with more talent than money, she saw beauty in the building's decay. The vast, high-ceilinged room, with its peeling paint and pre-war moldings, was both her sanctuary and her studio. The rent was a miracle in a city that had long ago priced out its dreamers. The Taylor family, Louis, Marie, and their 8-year-old daughter Alice, occupied 5C. Their apartment was a cramped but loving space, overflowing with toys and the scent of freshly laundered clothes. They were perpetually behind on bills, perpetually exhausted. But they had each other. The Corinthian, for all its faults, was the only stable roof they could afford over their daughter's head. They were the last 3 holdouts. The other tenants had been trickling out for years, driven away by rising crime, failing infrastructure, and the sheer oppressive gloom. The remaining 3 households had formed a small, unspoken alliance, a shared nod in the hallway, a held door for a grocery-laden neighbor. They were the keepers of a dying place.
Then the notices appeared. Taped to every apartment door with an aggressive, industrial-strength adhesive, the crisp cream-colored paper felt like an alien intrusion. The Corinthian had been sold. Blanchard Development, a name synonymous with ruthless gentrification, was the new owner. A buyout was offered, a sum so insultingly small it was more a gesture of contempt than a genuine offer. They were given 30 days to vacate. That evening, the 3 households met in the dim, buzzing light of the 5th floor landing. "It's a joke," Louis Taylor said, his voice tight with a helpless anger. "We can't find a shoebox for this kind of money, let alone a place for Alice." Alfred, his back ramrod straight, clutched the notice in his liver-spotted hand. "This is my home. They'll take it from my cold, dead hands." Beatrice, ever the pragmatist, was more subdued. "I looked up Alistair Blanchard. He has a reputation. He doesn't like to be told no." But they had no choice. To leave was to be cast into the unforgiving wilderness of the city's housing market. To stay was to fight for the only ground they had left. They agreed, with a shared, desperate resolve, to stay. They would be thorns in Blanchard Development's side. They had no idea what kind of monster they were daring to provoke. The campaign began not with a bang, but with a drip. First, the water in the taps turned a rusty, unsettling brown, tasting of earth and metal. Then it would vanish entirely for hours, returning with a shuddering cough in the pipes that sounded like the building's own death rattle. The electricity was next. It flickered and failed, plunging the long hallways into absolute blackness, stranding Alfred on the 7th floor and forcing Beatrice to work by candlelight. Then came the noise. It started at 7 a.m. on a Monday. A monstrous, concussive boom from the ground floor shook the entire structure, rattling teacups in Alfred's cupboard and sending a spiderweb crack across one of Beatrice's window panes. From that moment on, the sound was relentless. It was a symphony of destruction conducted by a madman. The high-pitched scream of power saws, the percussive sledgehammer blows that seemed to land directly on their walls, the deep, gut-vibrating drill that wormed its way into the building's very bones. It was not the sound of construction. It was the sound of torture. It came at all hours, midday, dusk, the dead of night. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. The tenants' attempts to protest were met with a chilling bureaucratic silence. Calls to Blanchard development were routed through an endless automated system. The site foreman, a hulking man with a clipboard and dead eyes, simply stared through them when they approached. Legal aid offered pamphlets and long waiting lists. They were utterly alone, besieged in their own homes.
A fine, pale dust began to coat everything, a ghostly shroud that muted colors and choked the air. It was the pulverized remains of the building itself, a constant reminder that the place was being unmade around them. The initial campaign of harassment, however, was about to escalate into something far more insidious. The physical siege was about to become a psychological one. The change was subtle at first, a sliver of wrongness that was easy to dismiss as a trick of the light or a product of their sleep-deprived minds. Beatrice was the first to experience it. Rushing for her morning class, she turned left out of her apartment, heading for the main stairwell as she had 1,000 times before. She walked 10 paces and stopped, her hand hovering in the air where the stairwell should have been. Before her was a seamless, freshly plastered wall. It was still faintly damp to the touch. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her fatigue. She backtracked, heart hammering, and took the long way around through the west wing, her sense of direction completely thrown. The building had shifted. A few days later, Alfred went to visit the Taylor family. The walk from 7A to 5C was a familiar ritual, a journey he could make in his sleep. But this time, the hallway outside his apartment seemed to stretch. The familiar water stain on the ceiling, usually 20 feet from his door, was now 50 feet away. The distance to the elevator felt impossibly long, the patterned carpet repeating with a nauseating, hypnotic rhythm. It was as if a malevolent hand had reached into the building and stretched it like taffy. The true terror began when things started to disappear entirely. The Taylor's next-door neighbor, apartment 5A, had been vacant for years. One morning, Marie Taylor opened her door to retrieve a delivery and gasped. The door to 5A was gone. In its place was a solid brick wall, the mortar so fresh it was still dark and damp. There was no sign a door had ever been there. That night, Louis pressed his ear against the new wall and heard a faint, rhythmic scraping from the other side. And then there were the workers. The construction crew was a team of half a dozen figures, all clad in identical, unmarked gray coveralls. They wore thick work gloves and, most unnervingly, smooth white masks that concealed their entire faces. There were no eye holes, no mouth slit, just a blank eggshell facade. They never spoke, not to the tenants, not to each other. They moved with a spectral grace, their steel-toed boots making no sound on the dusty floors unless they were actively engaged in their cacophonous work. Alice Taylor started calling them the Quiet Men.
One afternoon, she saw one of them standing at the far end of the hallway, perfectly still, his masked face tilted slightly, as if listening. He remained there for over an hour, a silent, motionless sentinel, before turning with an unnatural fluidity and disappearing into the shadows. The tenants' desperate alliance began to fracture under the strain. Fear was a corrosive acid eating away at their resolve. They were no longer just being harassed, they were being toyed with. The goal was no longer simply to evict them, it was to break them. The realization that they were trapped came on a Thursday. Louis Taylor, his nerves finally shattered, decided he was getting his family out, buyout or no. He packed their most essential belongings into 2 suitcases and herded Marie and Alice towards the main lobby. They found the grand entrance doors chained and padlocked from the inside, a new, hastily welded set of iron bars crisscrossing the glass. Taped to the bars was another of Blanchard's crisp, cream-colored notices: "Active demolition zone, no entry or exit by order of Blanchard Development." They sprinted to the back, to the service entrance. It was bricked over. The fire escapes they discovered with a surge of pure ice-cold dread had been cut away from the building, their metal platforms lying like skeletal remains in the alley below. The Corinthian was no longer an apartment building. It had become their tomb. Panic gave way to a chilling, stark certainty. This wasn't about money or real estate. This was a game. A sick, elaborate performance for an unseen audience. And they were the unwilling actors. The labyrinth began to close in. One night, a wall materialized in the 5th-floor corridor, a solid floor-to-ceiling barrier of cinder blocks that hadn't been there when Lewis had checked the peephole an hour earlier. It cut the Taylor family off from the rest of the building. They could hear Alfred's frail, reedy shouts and Beatrice's frantic pounding from the other side, but the sounds were muffled, distant. They were isolated.
Then the intercoms crackled to life. They were new, small black grills installed discreetly near the ceiling in every hallway and apartment, unnoticed in the chaos until now. A voice filled the building, not human, but a perfectly synthesized, smooth, and genderless tone. It was calm, clinical, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Good morning, residents. The renovation is now entering its final phase. Welcome to the Proving Ground." The voice, which they knew could only belong to Alistair Blanchard, continued without pause. "The structural integrity of the building has been reimagined. Your former homes are now variables in a new design. The objective is simple: navigate the maze and find the designated exit. Your progress will be monitored. The quiet men are on hand to facilitate the process and reset the parameters as needed. Your tenancy is terminated. Your trial begins now." A single, soft chime echoed through the building, and then silence. In 7A, Alfred Adler sank into his armchair, the one Clara had reupholstered by hand. He looked at the photographs on the mantelpiece, at the worn Afghan folded over the sofa. He was an old man. He would not run through a madman's maze. He would not be a rat for Alistair Blanchard's amusement. This was his home, and here he would make his last stand. With a strength born of finality, he dragged his heavy oak bookcase in front of the door. He sat and waited, listening to the silence, remembering the laughter that once filled these rooms. It wasn't long before he heard the faint, high-pitched whine of a power saw beginning to bite into the wood of his apartment door. Beatrice, fueled by adrenaline and terror, knew that stillness was death. She grabbed her heaviest sketchbook and a charcoal pencil, her artist's mind instinctively trying to impose order on the chaos. She would map it. She remembered the original blueprints she'd once seen in the basement. She would use that memory as her baseline. She slipped out of her apartment into a hallway that was now narrower than before, the walls seeming to press in on her.
She moved quickly, quietly, sketching the shifting architecture, noting the new dead ends, the staircases that now led to bricked-up ceilings. She was navigating a nightmare, a place governed by a hostile and illogical geometry. Turning a corner, she came face to face with one of the quiet men. It stood 20 feet away, its blank mask a terrifying void. It didn't run at her. It simply began to walk, its pace steady, unhurried, inexorable. It was hurting her. She fled, her breath sobbing in her chest as the silent figure drove her deeper into an unfamiliar section of the third floor, where the very air grew cold and smelled of wet cement. Through a fresh hole knocked in a wall, she saw into another apartment, but it was no longer a home. It was filled with a bizarre lattice of steel pipes, a complex three-dimensional jungle gym designed for torment, not play. On the other side of the new wall, the Taylor family was trapped. Lewis tried to break through the cinder blocks with a fire extinguisher, but only managed to bloody his knuckles. The synthesized voice returned, this time speaking only into their apartment. Detours have been provided, 5C. A section of their living room wall slid away with a low groan, revealing a dark, gaping passage. There was no choice. Clutching Alice between them, Lewis and Marie stepped into the unknown. They found themselves on a narrow catwalk in what used to be the building's central shaft, now a cavernous, dark chasm. The elevator was gone, the cables cut. A precarious network of steel beams crisscrossed the darkness, leading to other openings on other floors. From somewhere far below, they heard a man scream, a raw, terrified sound that was cut short with a sickening, wet crunch. They realized with a fresh wave of horror that they weren't the only subjects. There must have been other holdouts in other Blanchard properties, all funneled into this architectural nightmare.
They were halfway across one of the beams when two quiet men emerged from the passage behind them, and two more from the opening they were heading towards. They were pincered. The quiet men advanced, their silent, deliberate steps forcing the family towards a new opening in the wall, a solid steel door that glinted in the gloom. It had no handle on their side. As they were forced through the doorway, it slid shut behind them with the heavy final sound of a bank vault. The lock clicked. Beatrice was the only one left moving. Hours passed in a blur of terror and exhaustion. The Corinthian had become a fluid, predatory thing. Hallways looped back on themselves, rooms inverted. Gravity itself felt unreliable. The air was thick with the dust of its own desecration. She was running on pure instinct, a hunted animal in an ever-changing cage. Finally, she stumbled through a newly opened doorway and fell to her knees, sobbing for breath. She was in the lobby. It was transformed. The grime was gone, the marble polished to a mirror sheen. The space was lit with cold, white architectural lighting, and in the center, where the security desk used to be, was a cube of thick, bulletproof glass. Inside the cube sat a man in an impeccably tailored dark gray suit. His hair was silver, his face was sharp and intelligent, and a faint, clinical smile played on his lips. He watched her not directly, but on a bank of high-resolution monitors that showed feeds from dozens of hidden cameras. Alistair Blanchard. His synthesized voice filled the lobby, softer now, almost conversational. Remarkable. Subject 3B, you've shown great adaptability, a surprising deviation from the baseline prediction. He gestured with a manicured hand towards the main entrance, which now stood open. It wasn't the chained-up door from before. It was a new, sleek, futuristic portal, bathed in a soft, inviting light. "Congratulations," the voice purred. "You have successfully completed the preliminary trial."
A desperate, broken hope flared in Beatrice's chest. A trial. It was over. She had won. She staggered to her feet, her body a symphony of pain, and stumbled towards the exit. Freedom! As she reached the doorway, she glanced through a small, circular window set in the door. The hope in her chest died, instantly replaced by a scream that would never escape her lips. It was not the city street outside. It was not freedom. It was the entrance to a vast, sprawling complex, an Escher-like metropolis of impossible structures and interconnected mazes stretching as far as the eye could see under a permanent artificial twilight. She saw other figures, small and desperate, scurrying through the gantries and corridors of this larger prison. The Corinthian hadn't been the maze. It was just the lobby. The renovation was just the beginning. The game was infinitely bigger, and she had just qualified for the next level. The door slid silently shut behind her, and her silent scream was lost in the cold, perfect silence of the proving ground.
Thank you for tuning in to this tale of terror. If you enjoyed the chilling transformation of the Corinthian, be sure to like this story and subscribe for more journeys into the dark. Until next time, be careful what you sign and always check your exits.